the rental side, what I focus on is really Class A product. These days, in order to build ground up, given what things cost, you almost have no choice but to focus on Class A product, because
Yeah.
that's the only kind of product that will give you the rents that can support the cost of construction.
Mm.
But even before construction costs got out of hand, I very quickly realized that a lot of this stuff is a management headache, and my focus for a long time has been on Class A product. We build really nice stuff that attracts really nice tenants. It commands really high rents, and in turn, it allows me to build a scalable portfolio.
Hey friends, welcome back to the Carrot Cast podcast. I'm your host, Brady Winder, and this is a podcast where we help you dial in your online marketing so you can build a business of freedom and impact. The second Tuesday of every month is our market harvest, where we're bringing you data from behind the scenes at Carrot, real estate industry data, and we bring on an expert to talk about something that we don't traditionally talk about during the podcast. So a little bit of a step away from online marketing to talk about what's going on, different relevant real estate industry topics. So I'll spend a couple minutes going over our data, but first I want to kick it off and introduce you to our guest, Daniil Kleyman. Welcome on, man. How are you?
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm going to go through our data real quick here, and then I'll toss it over to you to give an intro, and then we're going to be talking about multifamily today. So multifamily trends and opportunities for 2023 and what Daniel's seeing in his market. It's going to be a fun conversation. So real quick, behind the scenes at Carrot, it's been a couple months since we did this. We skipped last month. And as a side note, I'm probably not going to be on the next one or two of these. I'm having a kid at any time now in the next couple weeks. Thank you. And so Trevor is going to be coming back on. So y'all get to hear from Trevor. He's been away from the podcast for a little bit, and he's going to dive really deep, much deeper into the data with you guys. And hopefully Tyler Ford, my co-host, will be rejoining us soon as well. Anyway, so visitors, what we're seeing behind the scenes at Carrot is in terms of visitors, motivated sellers coming to Carrot sites has declined steadily. Not a huge drop off, but a little bit tapered down over the last 9 months or so, 9 to 12 months, for two reasons. One being the Google May update in 2022, and some rankings being impacted by that. And that's not I want to make it very clear, it's not a Carrot issue we're seeing, but this is internet wide in, multiple industries. And this is primarily businesses, websites that didn't have their EAT profile set up well. So that's their expertise, authority, and trust. They were the most affected. Basically, this is just a long-winded way of saying that people who weren't putting out quality, unique, relevant content, their rankings were impacted with some of the Google updates from last year. It's kind of a double whammy, though. It's compacted by the interest rates, coming up, obviously, through last year. Sellers are more sitting on the sidelines. So visitors have gone down. The good news is, though, leads we're seeing have gone up, 5.9% this month over last month. So that's good because it shows what we were anticipating, that we're coming out of the winter slump and heading up into that sort of boost we typically see in the spring. So that's what we're seeing with leads. It's encouraging. And we're predicting to see, usually it takes people a few months to they freeze when big shifts happen in the market. But we're seeing more seller interest. And so we do predict to see more seller interest as the year goes by, and should be seeing more leads. But as far as visitors and leads, where are they coming from? Social media, are they searching? Organic and direct meaning people going right to someone's, I can't remember, website. Direct and organic search continue to be the bread and butter for Carrot members, far and above paid search, social media, things like that. And so people are still bringing in leads. And then as far as what's converting leads at the highest rate, same thing. Organic search is continuing to convert at the highest rate, above things like paid social, direct mail, email, that sort of thing. And yeah, that's about it. The only other thing I'll touch on, see if it's in here. Only other thing I'll touch on, and if you have any thoughts on this, is inventory. We're at, for January 2023 of this year, we got 625,000 active homes on the market. It's Not exactly double, but close to double what it was January last year. Any thoughts on that, man? And how much that's dramatically changed?
You know, it's changed dramatically, but it's off of a very low baseline. Very low baseline. I mean, we had no inventory a year ago.
Yeah.
And you know, honestly, I don't watch this national data carefully. I barely watch it for my own market, and we sell houses. But I know locally we do not have enough inventory, and everything that's being put on the market, unless it's unreasonable or in terrible shape, it's selling. So
Yeah.
you know, I we still have a housing shortage in this country, and it's
Yeah.
not getting any better because of interest rates and because of home builders pulling back. So
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. We did an episode, I think our last market harvest was 2 months ago. We did an episode just about that. Like, what is it going to take for, for this gap to go away of the housing shortage? And yeah, there's quite a big gap to fill there. But
there's a
anyways,
huge
oh yeah.
gap. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about what you do. You've been in Carrot's ecosystem for a long time, been a friend of Trevor's for a long time.
Hmm.
What's your deal, man?
Well, first of all, congrats on the kid.
Thank
That's
you.
fantastic. Is that your first?
Second, we have an
Second.
8-year-old son, and so it's a big gap,
Okay.
intentional gap, but he's excited to
Yeah.
have a brother.
No, that's awesome. My brother and I are 9 years apart, and we
Nice.
hated each other for the first probably 20 years of his life, and then we became really good friends.
Sounds about right. Yeah.
So that's awesome. Congrats. I've got three myself, and they're all very close in age, which creates its own uh, craziness on a
Oh,
daily
yeah,
basis.
I'm
Um,
sure.
but so I live in Richmond, Virginia. That's where my real estate business is located. I my business right now primarily is focused on ground up development. So we have a home building division where we build and sell spec houses. But that's a small part of my business. We probably do anywhere between 12 and 20 houses a year. Most of my focus is on building long-term assets for my rental portfolio. So I develop multifamily, and then I develop mixed-use projects. I develop projects where it's mostly apartments, and then we will have a retail component either on the ground floor or on the corner of the building. So my tenants include restaurants, juice bars, yoga studios, cocktail lounges, co-working spaces. We have a restaurant that's actually having a soft opening tomorrow, another restaurant. So I'm very passionate about those kinds of projects because mixed use development in general allows us to create walkable neighborhoods. It allows us
Mhm.
to create amenities inside our buildings and then serve our tenants. So that part of my business I'm very passionate about, but my focus is on building long-term assets. And
Mm.
you know, I do everything from building duplexes to right now we're working on a 130 unit apartment complex and everything in between.
Is I'm curious for context here, is Richmond a pretty trending, is it growing pretty fast?
We've been we've been growing even before COVID, and during COVID, we were a big sort of beneficiary of people moving south,
Mhm.
right? You know, people moving, everybody's moving to Florida, but some people get tired of driving all the way down to Florida, and then they just stop and move into Virginia. Um,
Yeah.
no, all jokes aside, we've had a uh, solid influx of people from Northern Virginia, from DC, from Baltimore, people that are um, able to work remotely now, or um, people that are tired of the high cost of living up there, people that are tired of the traffic. And where I do business, we have a great quality of life. Everything, you know, housing is still relatively affordable. So people moving south from up there are hitting much cheaper price points than what they're used to, while actually driving our market up.
So, Daniel, with you doing being on the residential and commercial side with mixed use and doing spec homes, how are you determining where to put your investments in? Like whether you want to go more into residential versus commercial, and then I don't know if this applies to you at all, but are you considering like different, A, B, C, D classes or markets?
It's a great question. So on the rental side, what I focus on is really class A product. Now, it's funny because these days, in order to build ground up, given what things cost, you almost have no choice. but to focus on Class A product, because
Yeah.
that's the only kind of product that will give you the rents that can support the cost of construction.
Mm.
But even before construction costs got out of hand, my preference, and we have an in-house property management company that manages all of our assets, so we're vertically integrated. But my when I started 15 years ago, I had some student housing, I had some Section 8 rentals, and I very quickly realized that a lot of this stuff is a management headache and be a nightmare. So my focus for a long time has been on the Class A product. We build really nice stuff that attracts really nice tenants. It commands really high rents. And in turn, it allows me to build a scalable portfolio because we lease these properties quickly. Our rent comes in on the first of the month. They stay rented. They have very low turnover. We have tenants that treat our properties really well. And, I haven't had to evict somebody in over 10 years. I
That's nice.
haven't had to even threaten eviction to a tenant in probably the same amount of time. We're 100% leased, we're 100% rent collected usually within the first week of the month. Inevitably there's always somebody that's having a little bit of difficulty and needs a few days to catch up, but I mean, it's a the kind of portfolio that I actually want to scale, and we don't mind managing. And my property management staff that sits in my office, um, they're proud of the product that we put out in the market. They're proud to walk potential tenants through
Mm.
those units. They're proud of the kind of buildings that we put out. So my focus is on Class A. And again, ironically, I mean, these days you really have no choice. If you're going to build ground up, there's a reason why everything nationally that's coming up, that's multifamily ground up, it's all Class A stuff, unless you're getting low income housing tax credits and you're getting subsidies from the government, in which case you can afford to build quote unquote affordable. But otherwise, if you're doing, if you're not getting subsidies, you're building class. You have no choice. You're putting out Class A product that must command Class A rents,
Mm.
and that's almost the entire construction pipeline right now in the country. So that answers your question about the rental product. How much spec product we're putting out, how many houses we're building to sell. The, yeah, we pay attention to the market, we pay attention to interest rates, we pay attention to buyer demands. I was spooked for a while because probably the biggest pipeline we've ever had has been over the last 4 months of what we have under construction. And given what interest rates were doing and people yelling gloom and doom, there was a period of a few months where I I was a little bit freaked out because we were building more houses than ever. Last November, December, buyer demand plummeted, right? It was
Mhm.
just dead. But things rebounded in January. Everything that we've put out on the market so far, and I've had 3 closings in the last 30 days, has sold. It's sold quickly. I can't speak for every part of the country. I can't speak for other markets, but what we're seeing locally is that if you build a good product in a relatively good location, because there are less buyers now, and buyers are more picky about what they're buying. If you put out a good product in a relatively good location, and if you don't try to push the market, right? What we did a
Mm.
year ago was we put product out in the market and we said, hey, I think it's worth 450. Let's see if we can get 485.
Yeah.
And half the time you'd have multiple bids and you'd get 485, right? You can't do that anymore. You can't price things unrealistically because they will sit.
Yeah.
So if you're putting out good product, if you're putting out good product in a relatively good location that doesn't have any major red flags, and if you're listing things at reasonable prices, what we're seeing is that everything is still selling.
Mm.
Now, again, there are overheated markets around the country, and that's no longer the case. But the beauty of the market that I'm in is it's always been fairly even keeled, right? It didn't
Yeah.
go crazy during the housing boom. It didn't go crazy on the way down during the recession of '08. It's been a fairly stable market compared to places like Phoenix that goes nuts, or Austin, right?
Yep.
That just
Yep.
goes whew, and then goes, and cools off really rapidly.
Mhm.
And I like that about our market because it makes sense on a regular basis, whereas there are some other markets around the country that um, are very temperamental.
Yeah, Tyler Ford, our co-host, he was on the last one we did. He's in Tucson, and he's experienced that, the crazy highs and lows.
Hmm.
It's wild, the swings there.
It
Um,
is, yeah.
so, I'm curious about the multifamily, but more so the mixed use too. I love walking through towns like we're talking about, where it's really walkable. There's just so much going on. What kind of opportunities are you guys seeing in Richmond for multifamily and mixed use coming up this next year?
So I've got a bunch of projects in the pipeline with that are mixed use, and what I am realizing is that, again, if you just listen to the news, if you pay attention to all the talking heads over the last 5-7 years, retail is dead, retail is dead. It's not true, right? People will always want to go to restaurants. People will always want to go to local neighborhood amenity
Mhm.
spots. Now, location makes a great difference. So there are places where I'm building apartments where I won't do mixed use because it just doesn't make sense to put a business there. There's not enough foot traffic, there's not enough car traffic. It's a great place for multifamily, terrible place for mixed use.
Yeah.
So when we build mixed use, we're a lot more selective about locations than even we would be with a regular multifamily product.
Mm.
But there are still ample opportunities, I believe, throughout the country to build mixed use projects in the right locations because people more than ever probably want that walkability.
Mhm.
Everything is moving towards density, right? Like we're not I truly believe we're not going to come back from the age of suburbs and cul-de-sacs where everybody wants that, right? There's a
Mm.
huge part of this country that wants to live in amenitized walkable neighborhoods, and there's lots of cities around the country that lack that. There are
Have you
lots of, yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was gonna ask if you've seen that trend come up since the pandemic. Has that been pretty dramatic, going from everybody being completely isolated, stay inside, quarantine, to now, hey, we want to be out and about in a walkable neighborhood? Has that
you,
benefited you?
you know I was in the middle of a 20,000 square foot mixed use project,
Mm.
right when the pandemic's actually 25,000 square foot mixed use project, right when the pandemic happened, and we never saw that fall off.
Mm.
So we opened up phase one of that project in May of 2020, like when lockdowns were hardcore.
Yeah.
And and one of the businesses in my building that opened up was a juice bar, and it was a perfect business for the pandemic because it was a small space, it was mostly carry out, right? And they opened up during a perfect time for that. And we never saw. So I personally, I guess what I'm trying to tell you is, I never, in the neighborhoods where we're active, we never really saw that demand go down. Even during
Interesting.
the pandemic, people wanted to walk places. It's just what they were doing changed because maybe they weren't sitting down in big restaurants around a lot of people, but they still wanted to go and grab a cup of coffee.
Mhm.
They still wanted to go grab a juice or a smoothie. They wanted to go and pick up a meal. So most most of the retail development that we do, they're small spaces, right?
Mhm.
I don't do these. If you go into a suburban shopping mall, they have these restaurants that are 5, 6, 7,000 square feet, right?
Yeah.
We don't do that stuff. What I love doing is making small bets. So
Mm.
our average retail space is 1,000 to 1,200 square feet. And so right now we just finished phase two of that project that has another 5,000 square feet of commercial space, and there's 6 tenants in there.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which means that these tenants have smaller overhead. They're making more revenue per square foot than they would in a really big building, right? Big space. And also, if one of them doesn't work out, we're not sitting with 5,000 square feet empty. So the
Mhm.
project that we just finished, that's got an ice cream parlor with a full production kitchen. It's got an office. It's got 1,000 square foot co-working space that fits 22 desks in it. Don't ask me how, but you know.
Yeah.
It's got a they're getting ready to open up a ramen noodle shop that's
Mhm.
going to be mostly a takeout, and then there's like a 1,200 square foot cocktail lounge in there. And that's one of the things that I really love about this business is because we get to curate tenants. I have an apartment building and it's got a bunch of commercial tenants downstairs, and I get to really curate who goes in there and make sure that those businesses are not just somebody that can breathe and pay a rent check. I want to make sure that those businesses are an amenity to my tenants, are an amenity to my neighborhood, and they become a draw and help me lease up the apartments in that building, because we have 21 apartments in that building as well. So that's that's one of my favorite parts about this business, is being able to put together a tenant mix that's very complementary, but just massively enhances that block and the neighborhood.
Mhm.
And you drive past that building now, and especially when it gets warmer in the summer, and you just see activity on the street, people on the sidewalk, people at tables on the sidewalk, benches eating ice cream, and it's cool because it's you can see the difference.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that. I love the way you describe that, and I love how you talk about making small bets versus, one tenant at 5,000 square feet. If that tenant's out, like, you're kind of screwed. Um,
Yeah, you're just yeah, you're and uh, the downside is that the downside to retail, and when I say retail, most people, when they think of retail, they think like stores. When we say retail, we I can mean restaurants, I can mean cafes, I can mean office. To me, all of
sure.
that I kind of throw into that retail bucket. Let's call it commercial.
Yeah.
The downside to commercial is, when things are good, things are good. When when those tenants are there, they're there for many years, right? I've had a restaurant, my first ever commercial tenant. They're probably coming up on 10, 11 years now, and they're doing great.
Nice.
So when it's good, it's good. Those tenants are in there for a very long time. They pay their rent. It's usually triple net leases, which means that those tenants are responsible for their own maintenance. They pay their share of real estate taxes and insurance. So it's very little management on our part. So when things are good, they're great. The problem is when these tenants leave, and inevitably all of them at some point will. I hope it's not for a very long time. It's not as easy for me to fill as an apartment.
Mm.
If you move out of one of my apartments, I can advertise it. I may have to do some touch up painting, but I can have somebody in there potentially tomorrow moving in. Commercial spaces are much harder to fill because, you know, you have to find the right tenant. You have to qualify that tenant. Then you have to make sure that that space is right for that tenant. And if that space is not right for that tenant, then you're renovating that space again, and
Mm.
you're contributing what's called TI allowance for that tenant, which is tenant improvement allowance.
Mhm.
So replacing these tenants is much more complicated, and it will inevitably cost money.
Mhm.
So it's a double-edged sword, right? When things are good, things are wonderful, and inevitably there is going to be a time when things are um, going to be not so wonderful. But you
Yeah.
put money away for that, you put reserves away for that, so that when it happens, you're prepared.
Mm. Yeah, and you're also not you're not building and designing super niched properties that are very specific. You're keeping them open to retail so that,
For the most part, I mean, we just finished. Again, we're finishing this building where one of our tenants is putting into 2,000 square feet. They're putting a really really high end cocktail lounge and a ramen noodle shop with a shared kitchen.
mm, yeah.
They built that space out from the ground up, meaning it was just gravel floor,
Mm,
gravel on the floor, and four walls. So that entire build out is very specific to their exact needs and designs. It would be challenging to get somebody to come in and simply take over their space.
yeah.
But at the same time, they have so much skin in the game of their own that, you know, and they're very good operators. They're going to be successful for a long time. And when the time comes for them to go, we will have depreciated the building so much, and we will have made so much money from it that we'll cut a check and bite whatever cost it requires to replace them with somebody else that's going to be awesome.
Mm,
And
yeah, that makes
that's just
sense.
the nature of the game.
I want to be there right now. I would love to be at a ramen shop and cocktail lounge right now. That's my
It's
cup
a
of tea.
it's a great combo. You go in
It is.
there, you have to wait to get ramen. You go next door, grab a drink, and vice versa. They're gonna do really well.
That's awesome. Um, so one other thing I wanted to ask you about before we wrap up, we like to keep this show short for the sake of time, and I want to ask you more about your transition into multifamily. I mean, we could go for hours about that, but let me boil it down into two areas, and I want to ask you about is
Sure.
you know, you're transitioning into, getting into more commercial properties, more as mixed use, a specialty, higher level investing versus your, people who are doing fix and flips and wholesales. When you started taking on some of those larger transactions, what were the two most helpful things you did? Or most helpful thing you did in the area of relationships? So what did networking look like? And then in the areas of finance, like was it reserves or what were the two things you did to kind of make that transition?
So I I would say uh, the most helpful thing to me was going at it slowly. Meaning,
Mm,
I was renovating single family houses, and I didn't all of a sudden wake up one day and said I want to build a 130-unit apartment building.
mm,
Now, can you? I suppose you can. You can go and raise a bunch of outside capital and find some good contractors and engineers and but you're kind of learning with other people's money. So one of the most helpful things to me was I evolved very slowly. I was renovating single family houses, and then I decided to build a single family house, and I built a duplex. They built a bunch of duplexes, and they GC them myself so that I truly knew what I was doing.
mm,
Then I built a 4-unit building and a 6-unit building. Then we built a 14-unit building. So I made it a point to do it slowly and grow organically, and that allowed me to build my knowledge base and my confidence, and to address your actual question. That also gave me plenty of time to build up credibility with my local lenders. We do a lot of business with
mm,
local community banks. They didn't just come out of nowhere and hit up one of these banks. It was like, I need $20 million. I established long-term track records with these bankers by borrowing small amounts of money, paying it back, or if it's properties that I'm keeping, that making my loan payments every month. And it's allowed me to build good long-term relationships with subcontractors as well. They're
mm.
guys that have been working on our projects for many years, and we know and trust each other. So uh, so as far as relationships, capital is incredibly important. It's easy to do residential deals with private money lenders, or just with your own a little bit of cash. When you get into larger scale development, you will need institutional money. You're going to need banks. You're going to need bank or bank like lenders. So the relationships that I've built over time have been by performing on a number of deals and gradually ramping them up. um so so you asked me about finances, and you asked me about relationships. So those are interrelated,
Yeah,
right? Your
yeah.
To do larger scale development, you need two things. It's very simple. People overcomplicate it. To do any kind of large real estate deals, you need equity and you need debt, right?
Mhm.
There's no such thing as 100% financing when you're doing a large scale development, right? You're going to need skin in the game, and that can be skin in the game that you bring from your own money, or you can bring in limited partners that contribute equity to your deal, right? So for me, I don't like to raise a lot of outside capital. So for me, it's also been helpful to kind of slowly ramp up my own finances so that I'm able to execute larger deals without going out there and raising money from 50,000 people. Um,
Mm, yeah.
but again, that's a personal preference, right? There are other investors that very successfully syndicate deals, and they go out and they raise all of their money from outside investors. And then they bring a bank lender to contribute the remaining portion of it, whatever, it's 70-80% of the deal, and they can execute deals that way. Um it just it, it it just depends on what your preference is.
Yeah. And how much bandwidth you have, how much stress you wanna take on, you know?
Yeah, and what I always tell people, because we mentor a lot of people, and we mentor people trying to get into development or larger scale deals. Um, Having an operating business that's separate from your long-term investment or development business is helpful. So there is a reason why we, for example, build spec houses to sell. It's not my primary focus. It's not where my passion lies, right? I'm very passionate about building the long-term portfolio. But being able to build 12, 15, 20 houses a year and sell them and generate a healthy amount of profit then creates a piggy bank for me and generates my own equity internally that I can roll over into long-term projects.
Mhm.
So the more of those deals I do, the less money I have to raise from partners or from outside investors. So if you can have an operating business of some sort that generates operating cash and profits and use that to fund your long-term investments, that's always helpful. And banks like to see that as well, right? So many investors and so many developers like don't have two pennies to scrape together. It's all coming from outside sources.
Yeah.
If you can show your lender that, look, I've got a separate business that has a history of generating profits, you're going to be much more likely, it's going to be a lot easier for you to secure financing,
Mm.
because banks, when they finance deals, whether they be small or large, they don't just look at what you have. They look at what are you able to get. If things don't go according to plan, if things, if if your project goes over budget, if unforeseen things happen, yes, what do you have now? Do you have reserves? Do you have liquidity? But it also helps them to show that I'm able to generate more cash. I'm able to create more money to tackle situations that may arise that may sink the deal. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, man. And I appreciate the context in your journey there and really the patience because I think a lot of, I see a lot of investors look like, "Oh, I'd love to get into multifamily or I'd love to get into commercial." And to them, it's what you described, the other scenario of like you go from flipping a house to building a 130 unit complex. And so, I like how you kind of break that down and start to build trust with people. And you kind of answer my two questions with one response of like, go slowly. You build those relationships. You're not taking big bets. You're making smaller ones and building those relationships with the banks and the subcontractors as well. Um,
And you're also just, I mean, if you're going to play with other people's money, you need, if the fake it till you make it thing is fine if you're playing with your own dough, right?
yeah,
But there's so many people out there that are faking till they make it with other people's money, and that's irresponsible,
yeah,
right? I mean, there's a lot of people that are jumping into, syndications, and they're buying apartment buildings, and they don't know what they're doing, but it's it's not hard to raise money these days. I just had this conversation with a friend of mine the other day. It's very easy to raise capital from people who don't know what they're doing. There's so much gullible money out there that if you are unethical and unscrupulous, you can go out there and raise a ton of cash, but
mhm.
you need to be a steward, a responsible steward of that money.
Yeah. So, my last question, and we'll wrap it up here, man. You mentioned subcontractors. You GC'd your first few developments, and so you truly have a good understanding of what goes in. I'm assuming you know what good skilled labor looks like and how to get the best bang for your buck. Contractors, from my own experience building, from talking to everyone else's building, is like contractors there's a shortage, we know that, and
Hmm.
it's become more and more difficult to find quality skilled labor. Um, Meanwhile, materials going up, like everything's just gotten more difficult for construction.
Sure.
Besides those long-term relationships and you having the experience of GCing, are you doing anything specific to like, find and retain quality subs?
Yeah. So, absolutely. I'm always having new conversations. I'm always having new conversations with subs and suppliers too. That's the other thing that I some of the people that we mentor, they're doing projects and they're still buying everything from Lowe's and Home Depot, right? I mean, there's a lot of
Yeah.
suppliers locally that we get to compete with each other on lumber, windows, siding, doors. Just the amount of money that you can save there for any given project by simply shopping around to
Mhm.
3 or 4 people is incredible. But we're there's two parts to that game, right? I mean, maintaining existing relationships with your subs. And what I mean by that is, I guess it helps to give them consistent work so that they know where their bread is buttered, right?
Yeah.
Paying them quickly. That goes a long way. And like, our subs never have to chase us for money.
Mhm.
And we don't nickel and dime them and don't short them. Like, if we agree to a certain number, there's no situation in which I call them when they get that bill and say, "Yeah, but you didn't do this, or you took an extra 3 days to do it, and I'm going to chip away some money from you." So taking care of your people goes a long way, right? If they know that you're going to give them consistent work, and if they know that they're going to get paid quickly without any kind of bullshit, that goes a long way. So we
Right.
take care of our existing subs. But that being said, we are very careful about keeping our existing subs honest. And what I mean by that is, you know, when he know like when your electrician knows he's your only guy, he's your go-to guy, those prices are going to start creeping up,
Mm.
right? So we're constantly checking them, right? Like, you're my guy, but I'm going to make sure that you're staying competitive from project to project. And in order to do that, we're constantly having conversations with new subcontractors.
Mm.
And a lot of that is coming from our network. I talk to other builders, I talk to other developers, and I say, "Hey, who are you using for electrical these days? Like, who is there anybody that you're happy with that you don't mind referring?" And it's not hard to form new relationships. But it's a constant game. You're constantly updating your list of contractors, because even your go-to guys eventually fade out, right?
Mhm.
They self-sabotage or get burned out. Or so, I mean, you need to constantly keep a Rolodex of backup subcontractors.
Yeah.
um and being disciplined is really important. What I have become more disciplined about over the last couple of years is, again, when I have go to subcontractors, we get 2-3 bids for everything,
Mm.
always,
Yep.
right? There's never a situation where, or I'm sure there's been situations, but the goal is to never have a situation where I'm just getting a price from one guy and
Mhm.
blindly signing off on that. So, I mean, we're getting multiple bids on everything, and keeping people honest and keeping people competitive
Yeah.
without, like, just beating the living shit out of somebody, right? Like, there's a
Yeah.
difference, and I see people taking that too far, right? I'm not
Mhm.
advocating like beating the crap out of your subcontractors so they're not making any money,
Yeah.
but keeping people competitive and getting them to, even now, right? Subcontractor shortage. We're still able to do that to a degree with our relationships because they want to work for us.
Mhm.
So, hey, listen, like, I want to give you this job, but you got to improve a little bit. What can you do here for me? And
Yeah.
you do that enough, and you're saving a lot of money on your projects.
Yeah. I like that. I appreciate that. It's checks and balances, it's
Hmm.
I like what you said about keeping them honest, minimum 2 to 3 bids, aim for 2 to 3 bids every project. Yeah, so you always have context. You understand what rates, because I mean, you know, I feel like rates for contractors are changing just as fast as interest rates. It's crazy. And they
Materials have gone crazier than labor over the last couple of years.
Mhm.
Materials have just been completely out of control.
Mhm.
What I found is that most of our subcontractors have been reasonable. They've not they've not taken advantage and jacked up their prices
Yeah.
excessively, right? For us, the biggest struggle has been materials
Yeah. Yeah.
over the last probably 3 years. That's been and not just pricing, but lead times. And right before I started this podcast, I got off the phone with my electrical contractor, and we're starting the 16-unit apartment building, and gear is taking 16 months. Like, the meter stack for the electrical meters is taking 16 months to arrive. So you have to order it. I mean, you have to order it just way in advance. Otherwise, you get to a certain point in your project, and then you're just standing still.
Hearing you say that and going through my own build myself, I think maybe maybe if anyone finds this interesting, let me know or email me, but brady@carrot.com. But maybe we'll do an episode on supply chain issues, because I think we all thought, at least a lot of people thought it was going to go away in a couple of years, that it would sort itself out. Clearly, that has not happened. So I want to know more about, when is this going to start to normalize? Will it normalize?
It's improved in a lot of areas, but there's still areas like electrical gear that
Mm-hmm.
and there's a few others. Our lead times in appliances has improved. We had major trouble
Yeah.
with appliances for a while, so some things have improved and some things are still very difficult.
Yeah. It's pretty wild. Drywall went up recently. I was like, well, how does drywall? This is crazy. I didn't see that one coming.
It's I mean, there was a period where we saw price increases every 30 days.
Yeah.
I mean, we
That's
would just
wild.
get an email from our suppliers every 30 days about a price increase, and it was insane. I mean, just for context, I built a lot of duplexes. I ran the math. Um, I have kind of a typical duplex that I like to build. It's about 2,500 square feet. Um, Apartment on top, apartment on the bottom. In 2016, I could build a duplex for $175,000. At the peak of lumber, right? It cost me double that. It cost me
Is
about
that
350 grand to build the same exact duplex. So that was
shit?
probably a year ago. Now lumber has come down since then, so I'm probably now, for that same duplex that cost me 175 grand to build in 2016, I can probably get it done for about 325 to 330 right now,
Is that materials or all in?
all in,
All
not
in.
including land,
Wow.
right? So
Okay.
just
Yeah.
just hard costs.
Yeah. Okay.
So I mean, almost double, you know, and people are wondering why housing is so expensive.
Yeah.
And it costs twice as much to build as it did seven years ago.
Hmm. Okay. Well, we might have our next episode. We might dive into that. That's an interesting one. It's affecting all of us. Um,
Hmm.
well, we're out of time, man. I appreciate you hopping on. Thanks for sharing your journey.
Sure.
Yeah, super insightful. Hoping to have you on again someday, man. And yeah, where can people find you? You mentioned you have students you're mentoring. Adam and Amanda New, Carrot members,
Yeah.
and Carrot campers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so I mean, I met Trevor ages ago, and we got into sort of the mentoring business through our software business. So I have a real estate analysis, marketing, fundraising, and project management software called RehabValuator that we came out with 10 plus years ago, and we have a very large number of clients, and there is a free version of that software that people can sign up for, and we use it in our own business. I use it for my ground up developments, for everything from
Mm.
deal analysis to creating funding presentations for all of our banks to actually running it. There's a construction management suite inside the software. So if people go to rehabvaluator.com, there's a free version there that they can sign up for.
I love
And
that. Made
that's
by
usually,
investors for investors.
yeah, I mean, I built it really for myself originally, for
Yeah.
for my own business, and then it's kind of evolved since then in line with the needs of my business, and it just so happens that it works for a lot of other people. But that's usually a great way to get a hold of me, because then you'll start getting emails from me and you can just reply to them, and I typically respond to everybody unless it's total nonsense, in which case it gets ignored. So
Yeah, absolutely. All right, rehabvaluator.com. We'll put a link in
mhm.
the show notes. All right, well, thanks again, Daniel, for joining me, and everybody watching and listening. Thanks for tuning in. If you have any questions, hit me up, brady@carrot.com. If you have any feedback on the episode, there's something you want to hear about, let us know. But Trevor will be on for the next Market Harvest, and until then, we will see you next time.